Okay, welcome everybody to the fourth installment of our winter webinar series, Updates from Michigan's Western Lake Erie Basin. This webinar series is designed to provide our community with updates about ongoing projects to monitor and manage nutrient pollution in Michigan's portion of the Western Lake Erie Basin. If you don't know me already, I'm Allison Bressler, and I manage the Western Lake Erie Basin Advisory Group. And this is a community group that works collaboratively with Michigan's quality of life agencies to inform how the state implements projects aimed at managing and monitoring phosphorus to improve water quality in Lake Erie. The Western Lake Erie Basin Advisory Group and this webinar series are generously funded by the Herb Family Foundation. So today we're excited to welcome Callie Rush, who is a regional biologist at Ducks Unlimited. Callie manages the development, delivery, and administration of conservation programs in Michigan. Callie works alongside Michigan DNR and other partners to implement the Seneca State Game Area Wetland Water Quality Project and the Wetlands Conservation Program. We also welcome today Steve Chadwick, the Senior Great Lakes Wetland Advisor for the Department of Natural Resources. Steve connects partners in wetland management and available funding sources through state or federal programs. Steve works closely with representatives from MDARD and Eagle on the Lake Erie Domestic Action Plan.
I think I'm going to kick things off, and then Callie and I are going to kind of hand it back and forth to each other. So first of all, thank you all for spending some time with us during your lunch hour. Really appreciate it. And hopefully this will be some value added for you today. So today we're going to talk about reviving the lost wetlands and a key to a healthier Lake Erie. So go ahead, Callie, to the next slide. And this is sort of the outline of what we'd like to cover today. So introductions will go fast because Allison already did that for us. And then we want to just kind of give a brief overview of wetlands, how we got to where we are. So a physiography of the area, along with some of the history of wetland conservation in Michigan, and then the efforts, and then moving forward into the future. So next, this is me. As Allison mentioned, I'm the Senior Great Lakes Wetland Advisor. It's a relatively new position with the department, and we're making some great progress, which I will talk about more at the end. So with that, Callie?
All right, thanks for getting us started there. All right, so I'll go quickly through mine too, give you guys a chance just to read through this. But again, I'm Callie Rush. I'm a regional biologist with Ducks Unlimited. Been in this role almost 6 years now. And yeah, really excited. We're going to try to take you all the way from glaciation in Michigan and what formed wetlands to today in our current issues and what we are trying to accomplish with the wetland work that we are doing. So first, we will start off with a little bit of Wetlands 101. Good to see that there's a lot of folks that have been involved in wetland restoration before. A good mix of folks that are semi aware of what we're doing. I saw there were a handful of 5 out of 5s there. I assume that's the few that are on our team that are on this call. So thank you guys for joining. So very quickly, what is a wetland? Wetlands essentially just need 3 major criteria. You'll see a lot of hydro here, water, so it needs hydric soil. Those soils that are able to hold water, if that soil never really goes away unless it's dug out and taken somewhere, that's always a really good sign of if wetland is present. It also needs hydrophytic vegetation, which is a fancy word for saying water-loving plants. These plants can grow in more saturated soils or kind of under the water. And then the third is some source of hydrology, whether it's incoming rainwater or water coming in from a stream, lake, elsewhere. It needs to have some source of water getting to that. Sometimes it's groundwater, but those are our 3 major components of a wetland. There's just a couple diagrams here that kind of show the difference between what we know of like bogs and swamps. These are going to be, kind of lower water table might oversect some of this. These are older, more, different systems that we're typically not restoring. These take thousands to millions of years to develop. Swamps can be a little bit quicker, but these are things that we're really trying to protect, and then thinking long term. These other two here are just talking about the difference from some of this more upland, emergent marsh, meadow marsh. Sometimes we are in these areas where it's just, the ground is saturated, but there's no standing water. That is still considered wetland. It hits these three criteria. And then all the way down into, emergent marsh, or even some into open water. So some of the floating water plants like a lily pad that we're all very familiar with. This is just another good diagram of what wetlands can look like. So, talking here about saturated soil. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to be flooded above the vegetation for it to be considered a wetland. This unsaturated soil would then be that upland. I like this photo here just to show, you can typically really see the water, some discoloration in soils. I'm not going to get too deep, but just a note to say, soils can dry out and look like this in a wetland. It's actually good for them to dry out every once in a while, get them reset. Wetlands are dynamic systems, especially emergent marshes that need to flood and then dry out to reset all of the good annual vegetation that is feeding our wildlife and waterfowl. Why are wetlands important? We'll talk a little bit about this, but really overall, wetlands are an incredible source of biodiversity. So it's not just ducks here at Ducks Unlimited that we're thinking about in waterfowl, but what are all the other taxon of species that use this? There are mammals, there are insects and macroinvertebrates, fish, a ton of different bird species, reptiles, amphibians, and a lot of different, unique plant species that can change depending on geography or the wetland type, maybe the amount of nutrients that are going in there, but really trying to play on wetlands are important for more than just ducks when it comes to wildlife. And then functions and services. So beyond wildlife habitat, why do we care about wetlands? Why are we talking about wetlands in the context of the Western Lake Erie Basin and improving water quality? We've known for a long time that restoring wetlands on the ground will help us produce more waterfowl, help us produce more birds that are using these areas for nesting and breeding habitat. But what else can they do? We know that they can clean water, so they can trap sediments and trap different nutrients, especially phosphorus is what we are really concerned about in Lake Erie. They can also help dissipate, floods, reduce that really flashiness of a storm and allow that water to kind of slowly get taken up by the wetlands, and ideally avoid, our roads and our homes and our systems there, as well as all sorts of other good recreational opportunities for wetlands. So just want to kind of point out this. We're going to touch on it a second later, but this is a really good description in the bottom corner here of, how we used to think about wetland restoration and how we're trying to think about wetland restoration now. So in traditional days, this was our pocket knife. This was our one tool. We restore wetlands, we get ducks. 1 acre equals X number of ducks on the ground. But realistically, this one tool has actually all of these other benefits. So this one Swiss Army knife is not just doing, providing wildlife habitat, but it's providing all those other ecosystem services. And how can we, achieve as many of these objectives as possible without having too many trade-offs on the other side? And Steve, I'll kick it back to you to talk about some physiography.
All right. So as Callie mentioned, we're going to take you back to the Ice Age. And we all know that Michigan was formed by the glaciers that once covered this part of the world. And one of the things, the most obvious feature are the Great Lakes, but also some of the features inland that the glaciers left us, whether they be the moraines that help soak up water and distribute it out on the alluvial plains, or just any of the other features, rivers, streams, etc. I think one of the things that's kind of neat are the kettle depressions or the kettle lakes that were formed. And when you think about how the ice sheet receded, leaving huge masses of ice underground, and as those melted, uh, resulting in various depth kettle depressions, and we see those dotted throughout the state to this day. Go ahead to the next slide, Callie. So if we fast forward a few thousand years, what were we left with, or what did the first settlers experience? And it was really a lot of these different wetlands scattered all across the lower peninsula, and in particular in the southeast part of the state. And when you look at some of the old survey data, the habitat features were conifer swamps, hardwood swamps, and then of course our open marshes and wet meadow or wet prairies. So then moving forward, we came in and needed to settle the land, I guess, and part of that was draining the wetlands to make room for farms, to make room for roads. Residential, commercial development took precedence. And so we see this series of drainage ditches and dikes and tiles and so forth to help aid in this development of the Michigan landscape. And so that's what we're working with today. Let's go ahead to the next slide. And so when you look at where we are now, I think it's about a 50% loss in wetlands across the state, and more acutely in the southeast part of the state, we've lost about 90% of our wetlands. And thinking about the history of the latter part of the 20th century, when state and federal policies were changing to help protect and in some cases maybe restore and enhance wetlands, those are some of the policy changes that we're dealing with now and working with into the future. So really quick, just a history on the DNR's involvement with wetland conservation. And it really goes back to the 1937 Act of Federal Aid to Wildlife Restoration, which is also known as the Pittman-Robertson Act. And that is where there's an excise tax on hunting equipment that then comes back to states for wildlife restoration. And in Michigan in the 1940s and 50s, the folks that were using that money decided to invest in land in southern Michigan, and that became our state game area system. And on that game area system, because we were purchasing land that might not have had as high a value for agriculture or commercial development, we started to restore and enhance and install wetlands. And so a lot of that early work was completed on those game areas, or in some cases in the state forest system, and resulted in a lot of low-head dams and berms being installed across the state on public lands. And somewhere along the way, one of our most cherished partner came along, that being Ducks Unlimited, and came alongside and has been on our side since. So Callie, why don't you talk about that history?
All right. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Wanted to give some background. I know we went through that part really quick, but really want to focus on the second half of this presentation about, what are we doing today? We know that Michigan looked very different, of course, before we settled it. And we want to all live here. I think everybody wants their homes and their roads. So how can we work with nature to help figure out some of these larger issues? So as Steve said, initially a lot of the DNR work was kind of internal. What could they do on their own land with the money that they had? So Ducks Unlimited started in 1937, but we in the States here were actually only fundraisers, and we did all the conservation work on the ground up in the breeding ranges of the prairies in Canada. In 1984, DU started a conservation program in the States, recognizing we have breeding areas here as well. So started up our prairie pothole region, or the Great Plains region that covers the prairie potholes, started Western region, Southern region, and then us here in the Great Lakes and Atlantic region. It was still pretty slow going. I think we had maybe one engineer for the entire region for about 20 years. And maybe one biologist that had some money, typically the DU money that we would try to then match with DNR, and just help pay for some of these projects. 1987 is when we completed our first project in Michigan, but things really ramped up after 1988, and the North American Waterfowl Management Plan created NAWCA, the North American Wetland Conservation Act. Several of you on this team may be aware of NAWCA or have been involved in a NAWCA grant, or at least heard about them with DNR or DU. But really in the 1990s and 2000s, that's what ruled the game. That's where there was funding available for wetlands, and all about waterfowl and waterbird, migratory bird habitat. In 2010, the GLRI was introduced with the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. They actually just celebrated their 15 years, which is really exciting. They've got a good report that was just published if anybody's interested in looking that up. But this is, regional, Great Lakes Basin wide, so not just Michigan, but it covers all sorts of different projects. They have several different focus areas, and that opened up several different funding opportunities. The GLRI is national, but it goes through several different federal agencies. So there's a lot of different ways to access that money for different types of projects. It's not just wetland restoration, but all has to do with water in our Great Lakes. So in the 2010s, about 15 years ago to 5 years ago, again, it was really NAWCA and GLRI driving migratory bird habitat restoration. Really focused on waterfowl, really focused on emergent wetlands. Where can we, again, get more habitat on the ground, whether it's for breeding or for stopover habitat as they're migrating north or south, and then, down in the wintering grounds, down into, the southern United States and Mexico. DU Mexico was established around 84, I believe, as well. And we started doing work across the continent to ensure that there is habitat during that entire life cycle for waterfowl. And then here we are, it's 2025. We're in the 2020s. We have had H2 Ohio come online. We have the Lake Erie Domestic Action Plan. There's a ton of work going on between Eagle and MDARD and now DNR to really, see how can we address water quality. So that's, new for us and our teams of thinking about, all right, we looked at that pocket knife that we knew that we know how to restore wetlands. We've done it for a long time. We know that we can get ducks out of that. What could we maybe tweak or learn from what we've done in the past to help, improve water quality? Sometimes it may be a little less ducky, we say, but has a lot more benefits. Or maybe it's pretty equal. We're trying to do that, but assessing those trade-offs and trying to get the best project done on the ground. So that's a little bit of historical context and where we are today. So to further, just kind of hit this point home, in the past it was, these are the folks that are at the table. It was a lot. DNR and DU worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service at the refuges here in Michigan, and really trying to tap NAWCA. Mostly we were focused on waterfowl habitat, and then hunting opportunities for waterfowl. Today, this is just a small, list of logos, but there are dozens of organizations, agencies that are either giving money or looking for money to do projects like this to reach not only goals of, NACA for migratory birds and GLRI, but also Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. How can we improve Lake Erie and other lakes? State of the birds. So how can we think about all bird species and not just waterfowl? So really, we're enhancing, adding to our list and broadening what's in each of those lists. So moving from just thinking about waterfowl to migratory birds, as a whole. Moving from just hunting to recreation as a whole. Where are there other opportunities? And then all of our ecosystem services in there as well. All right, so before I go to that, I just want to talk a little bit about how we're doing this before we talk about some of the project examples. So I will dive into our pilot project and then the Wetlands Conservation Program. But first, to achieve all of this, it can't just be, 2 partners, 3 partners that are doing this on public lands. Over 70% of Michigan is in private ownership, and Southeast Michigan is even higher than that, especially in the Western Lake Erie Basin. So if we're going to achieve these goals, we need to think differently. We need to think at a more watershed approach. We need to be thinking about several different types of activities and practices that can be done on the ground that work with the current land use or are a good transition to the next land use. So really, thinking on a watershed scale. So are we thinking at the Western Lake Erie Basin level, or what can we do in some of these smaller sub-watersheds to really get as much done on the ground as we can to make that impact in the water? And we've also started working with several different partners. So we've got, communities, we have municipalities, drainage districts and drain commissioners, all sorts of other folks beyond just our typical kind of recreational land users or public lands that are available to work on. I'll talk about our pilot project. I know some of you probably have a lot of information and some of you maybe haven't heard about this at all. So I'll do my best to do kind of an overall sweep. But this pilot project was started in 2020 and was looking for a way of, hey, we're looking at those folks, south of our border in Ohio, doing a ton of work for Lake Erie with, state level money for not just wetlands, but for other agriculture BMPs. But on the wetland side, we're not doing anything up here that's really taking into consideration that water quality from the beginning. And not just thinking about, okay, well, it will have some sort of benefit, but making sure that we're designing that in, that it will have a benefit. So it took several years to find a good site, but we've got just under 300 acres in ownership that is now called the Seneca State Game Area. This is about 20 minutes southwest of Adrian in Lenawee County. You can see the map up here. It is in the south branch of the River Raisin Stony Creek subwatershed, which is one of the 5 priority watersheds or subwatersheds for contributions of phosphorus to Lake Erie. This is an old imagery. I don't have the lines on here, or property lines, because they keep changing. So I'll just talk about this area as a whole. This is from 1998. And if anybody knows much about remote sensing or looking at this, everything we see here that's really dark is water. So that is water that is held in the soil. It's very wet in this area with several drains that are cutting through it to drain that now. So, when Steve was talking back, post-glaciation and what our wetlands looked like, this one was likely some sort of conifer swamp. It's very mucky, pretty boggy, and there are records from the early 20th century of hand digging these ditches to drain this larger basin. And then it exits out the Stony Creek here, eventually going to the River Raisin and then Lake Erie. So we have a site like this. We had farmers come to us and said, we've got, we have issues. We're not, we either get flooded out or frosted or this or that, but we're not getting a harvest. Is there any way that we could work together on this? it being Southeast Michigan means that this large basin is chunked up into several different small parcels and small properties that we are working to, work with the landowners and see what can we do, knowing if we don't buy, some of these properties, we need to keep them dry. But what can we do to intercept as much of the overland flow and the flow that's going through this area and clean it before it goes into the Stony Creek? So that's what we're working on right now. It's been pretty awesome. I don't see the farmers on here, but I know that some of them were signed up and are pretty interested in working with us. It's been a really unique opportunity. We've brought in the drain commissioner, brought in the road commission to talk about, opportunities there, and really trying to do as much due diligence as we can on the design to hit all of those extra, criteria, all those benefits. We want this to be duck habitat and waterfowl habitat and wildlife habitat. There's a ton of deer and turkeys and cranes out there already in the small portions of wetland that's there. So how could we add to that while also capturing as much water from these ditches as we can and cleaning it in that wetland before it exits the site? The purpose of this pilot project was to do kind of a proof of concept. So how can we do things like this across the state? And that'll be the Wetlands Conservation Program that I'll talk about next that we have started. Is how can we replicate this? We know a new state game area, multiple hundred acres, is awesome, but we're not going to be able to do that everywhere. So you'll see, number 5 for us is scalable. Can we scale it up or down? Can we do, wetland restorations on private lands that are all within ownership and do more of these, not have it be 4, 5, 6 years to complete one big project like this, but to get more done on the ground. We have learned a lot, and we continue to share those lessons learned with the Western Lake Erie Basin team and the rest of the folks that are working and trying to take that into now our wetland conservation projects that we are working with communities and other partners on. So the Wetlands Conservation Program, some of you guys may have heard about it. I know we did a couple pitches at the conference for this, but Michigan DNR was awarded $10 million in American Rescue Plan Act from the governor of Michigan to put into wetland conservation for water quality in both Lake Erie and Saginaw Bay watersheds. This is, federal COVID relief funding that is held within the state. And DNR needed some help. There wasn't a senior Great Lakes wetland advisor before, and it's a lot of money to be spent in a small amount of time, and to really figure out, like I said, it took 5-6 years for us to find the pilot site. How can we do, 10 or 15 projects in only 2 years? But overall, it's really focusing on community. We know how to work on DNR land. We know how to work on Fish and Wildlife Service land, but we know that we can't reach all of our water quality goals by only focusing on that small kind of postage stamp of land when the remainder is in private land. So how can we work with other folks that maybe are purchasing property or have property? This can be a land conservancy, a township. I've got some other examples later, but looking at similar type projects. And again, focusing in the areas that have the highest water quality issues, which are Lake Erie and Saginaw Bay. All right, so what are we doing with that Wetland Conservation Program money? So we have 14 projects across 12 different partners. So there are a couple partners that have 2 projects with us. And we've invested almost $6 million into these projects and leveraging another $4 million. So that's, $10 million of work that's being done on the ground across 1,200 acres between both of these watersheds. I have it split up in this pie chart a little bit more just so you can see, where these projects are and how much is going towards each. It is actually fairly even, although we didn't plan that. The Lake Erie non-WLEB, that would be, anything north of the Huron River watershed. And then Saginaw Bay is all encompassing. So we've got the map down here of, where projects were eligible. And we're doing wetland restoration, wetland enhancement, and we're also working on acquisition. So are there areas of either high quality that we can protect and ensure that they are protected with proper management long term, or is there areas that are really flooded farmland? Like this, you can see this is a good picture of seeing kind of a water path through a farm field. Are there really marginal grounds that the farmers are just not getting the harvest, it's not worth, the bang for the buck for them? How can we either take a portion out of production or, work with them to say, well, hey, let's restore this wetland here. Let's put an upland buffer and maybe we can square it off and have you farm around it. Or completely the other way of, hey, if you guys want to buy it, restore the whole thing, that's awesome too. Spend your time and money on farming the ground that is going to have a good production. So there's a couple, really cool projects. Like I said, this Western Lake Erie one, I'm pretty excited about at Superior Township. And then we've got a couple highlighted here from Saginaw Bay. So this first one, the Chippewa Nature Center, we helped fund a 500-acre floodplain acquisition. This is area that is right on the Tittabawassee River, or right on the Chippewa River, really susceptible to flooding. Now it's all under protection, and we know that it will never be drained. And then there's another example of purchasing land to restore. This is the Morley Trust acquisition with Thumb Land Conservancy. This is the Cuckolin River going up to Saginaw Bay. You can kind of see these lines in here are ditches. There's a couple of beach ridges in here, but mostly this has been ditched and drained for farming. And it's right on the river. There's a huge opportunity to clean a lot of that water around here. There's a rail trail that goes through here as well, providing some more public access and some unique opportunities to see these different wetland sites. So with this Wetland Conservation Program, this is our first go at it. A lot of you guys would know, with the ARPA money, it is, we pitched it as this is a one-time program, one-time funding. Ideally, this continues. We have an opportunity to develop something similar. We know that ARPA money is gone, but there's a lot of other interest and other funding out there to continue working with communities and continue doing projects like these. And Steve, I'll hand it off to you if there's anything else you want to add about moving forward there.
No, I think that you've covered that very well, and we could probably talk about what's next to come. So one of the things that came out of the ARPA kind of money coming to the DNR is an effort that Ducks Unlimited led with some other partners and with their volunteers and donors to work with the state legislature to make sure that there was wetland funding moving into the future. And so they have been very successful in working with legislators to put about $2 million annually into the DNR's budget for wetland restoration, enhancement, and protection. And so we're using what we learned from ARPA, what we're learning at the pilot project, to apply those funds in a way that really starts to touch all of the different services that these landscapes can provide, including flood mitigation, flood storage, water quality, of course, and wildlife habitat and green space. So that's getting going. We had to kind of sort of push pause on it to get the ARPA money out the door. And we're at the point now where we're able to start picking up and running with that again. And so if anyone has ideas or anything, get with us and we will work with you. The money that we're getting through it's general fund money, so it can be used pretty much anywhere in the state and matched with all kinds of different opportunities. So just to give you an idea, including ARPA in the last year, we've been able to fund nearly $20 million worth of projects with just over 12 million. So we're able to really leverage that money in a pretty effective way. So anyway, more to come on all of that. We're happy to be moving in all of these different areas and excited to see what the future brings. And I think with that, we're ready for questions if anyone has any, or Allison, whatever comes next here.
Steve, I'm going to put one final point on that call to action or request. We are always happy to pitch projects, look at projects, add it to a list. We mentioned NACA and GLRI and, leveraging that general fund. So like Steve said, we've done over $20 million of projects with only 12. We have these project lists that we've, kind of always held between our public partners with your DNR and Fish and Wildlife Service. But we are always happy to review projects and give you some insider thoughts. We've got a team of private lands biologists that are willing to do that as well. So if you ever have a question, don't hesitate to reach out.